G'day punters, welcome back to the Punters Academy review from Saturday's Golden Slipper Day. John Walter from racingwatch.com.au. Good morning.
Good morning, mate. Another interesting weekend. Hey, the track played pretty well, and at least we got around. Everyone got around safe, and some good horses, some slow paces, fast paces, plenty to work with.
Yeah, look, I think the track came out of a genuine sort of slow seven, or in the slow seven range, so it was probably better than reported. The inside lanes, so lanes 1 to 3, seem to be, rails and run and providing the best spots for horses to do best in the straight. Sitting wide seemed to be a bit of an issue, and it probably played better than we expected going into the meeting. Was certainly better than I expected. So the inside lanes obviously had recovered well, and obviously that ground was better or proved better on the day. So I think it's fair to say that there was a mixed bag of tempos on the day, and there was probably some advantage to be on pace, or at least within probably 3 lengths of the lead at the 800 and the 600.
Pretty normal, right? Pretty normal Rosehill.
Pretty normal Rosehill. Certainly not.
Which was a little bit surprising when that rain came so heavily in the morning, and it looked like it was going to be a bog, and they were talking about surface water and all sorts, but it seemed to, like I said, just recovered incredibly well in that short period of time that it stopped before the races commenced. It was very good.
Indeed. Okay, so let's talk about the midway to start the day. Nothing like a midway handicap to start the Golden Slipper Day. Over 1,500 metres. Look, they've gone out, I suppose, to simplify things going forward too. I'll just sort of break the pace down to what they've actually done. They've gone out above average tempo, or average to above average tempo here, and sort of everyone has had their chance. And I was on Fantastic Baby, I was in a bit of a coma there because I thought it was going to win for sure at the 100, and it didn't. But anyway, this is the way it goes. And in terms of other performances in the race, Catapult was slow to recover. Akhtar had cardiac arrhythmia, so I suppose there forgives. There was a bit of money for Mahagoni, which was sort of 15 to 1 and 9 to 1, and other than that, I
thought it went like a rocket too. To be fair, first up.
Yeah. High as I. What about it? Was it a bit disappointing? I mean, it was sort of 4 to 1, 5 to 1, and
you'd have to say yes, wouldn't you?
I think so. I mean, looking at the stewards report. Tim Clark suggested that he had to make use of the horse between about the 1,000 and the 600 to hold his position, and that may have contributed to the performance on the day. But there you there, see the winner coming up the inside there, the grey, and
it's just a little bit difficult at the moment, isn't it? Because it was coming off a first up win where it sat outside leader on a rain affected track, and a lot of these horses are, you got queries over how they've come through their previous runs. They're not all Shelby 66s, and some of them are regressing a little bit just because they've had tough runs. So your horse first up, like, oh my God, I feel terrible for you. But
yeah, no. Look, there was that the specking for the import there, the David Payne horse.
It's down the outside here in the yellow colour, so obviously not the right spot to be on the day, back and wide. And whilst it did get an even to solid tempo, it certainly wasn't, ridiculously fast run. So it was not flattered, and it was only first up. I thought its run and trials before really good. Stable that's very hard to catch at times, but in this sort of grade, this horse certainly can pick up a race. Probably back to Randwick will suit it better.
Is there much else to say about the others, John?
Not really. Like you said, I think these horses are just all like, he's going well, and he's honest. Lord Heron probably needs a bit dry track, but and this horse was okay too, still a performance. They're all going okay for this sort of grade, and they're take turns horses. But this horse has just got a little bit something more about it because it's a new blood and only having its first start in Australia.
Okay, let's move on to race 2, which was the Derby Munro. They've gone out below average tempo here. Look, Marzu is just going like a jet since it was gelded. We've talked about that before.
Push button horse now, isn't he? He's incredible.
Very, very surprised at the price once again. It was, look, I know it was sort of hard in the market, but it was probably slightly easy during official betting, but still very solid in terms of the fact that it did start, around about that sort of even money mark. So, look, it's just flying. What can you say? I thought it was a good price on offer.
Yeah, the only little query was where it was going to end up, like obviously behind leader, but whether it could get off and you needed to be 4 or 5 off, or whether it was going to dart back to the inside and whether that was going to be worse ground. And obviously, as the track sort of played, that query was sort of nullified, wasn't it? And he was just completely dominant. I don't think it would have mattered.
Look, I was really against backing earlier here coming into this race first up. Look, it absolutely leapt ahead last preparation in those 3 runs and wins that it had before it got tipped out. And I just took the view that the horse wasn't as good first up, and on 3 occasions, that's what the figures suggested. I know it was sort of flying at the end of last prep, and you've always got to be wary about those types of horses when they resume because they normally come back well. But, it did sit wide without cover, and perhaps maybe that was an excuse. But then again, there was below average tempo in the race, so it wasn't.
I think you're
sort of
probably right in hindsight,
hard.
as in he did sit wide and have a few things against him, but this horse is completely dominant over him, and I would expect him to get closer to him, but not on this day. Like, I don't think he's got any excuse for losing the race. I think he probably nailed it that he's going well and he'll probably improve off it, but on the day.
Omni-Man led and pulled up slow to recover.
Yeah, no surprises there. He's the one who's had foot issues and he's been well placed at the provincials, but excuse him in backing grade maybe.
And Smirnova sort of tended to over-race a bit outside lead there, so I don't know if that was an excuse for it. But
it was jumping in trip, wasn't it? It was the one. Was it 900 to 1200?
It was 955.
955. Yep.
Yeah. So, he was still relatively sold in the betting. I mean, 6-1 and 5-1 during the official call. I suppose it's always a bridge, isn't it? Stepping up in trip like that and how they're going to perform. But look, the winner was dominant. Interestingly, though, it does look like the winner may have regressed slightly on what it did last start, and that might just simply be to 1,200 metres after it had those 2 wins at 1,100. So who knows? But not much in it.
Where does it go? I don't know whether does it wait for a TJ or something and have a throw at the stumps, and I don't know whether he measures up to that grade, but I'm assuming it's very very appealing.
Yeah, well, the horse is just going so well that I suppose they've just got to keep going to well until such time as they decide that it's time to sort of tip it out this prep.
He's got a bit of that rule to win about him. What's it? Rule of law. Very well placed, but racing very well. Yep.
Incredibly so, indeed. Okay, on to the Manion Cup. They've gone out solid tempo here.
I'm not watching.
Watch no compromise there from, I think, gate 10 there. Jumped very well and certainly sort of jumped right on the bit. And
he does what Jay Ford does say after the race does make sense. This horse has never jumped like that.
No.
And it's not due to him jamming the horse. Look, at no stage does he jam the horse out.
Well, he's looking to get cover there, right, and restrain. So, look, it was fortunate for the horse. It did actually do a fair bit of work early because it sat there in a 3-wide position and had to work 3-wide around a bend to find. I
think that's forgotten too in all the drama after the race with the change of tactics. Look where this horse is, and they're going quick all through this section. He's still trying to get in. He's pushing the horse along. The horse has always shown that he's a horse that's been ridden cold and can finish off, but to put him out of his comfort zone like this, to sit outside leader on such a brutal tempo and still be able to hit the line, I think his performance has completely been overshadowed by the change of tactics garbage. And I love the horse. I would have backed it in a second if I knew it was going forward, but it's not a knock on the stable. It's a knock on the rule, because you expect as a punter that if it's going to be ridden 20 lengths closer, which it is, you're going to half know about it, and it just frustrates you. It's just a frustrating rule because no one can be right all the time. No stable can know where their horse is going to settle. So how can they pre-race predict it?
You've only got to go through the notifications that you do see in the stewards report and then try to compare what they actually did versus what they said they intended they were going to do. And quite often, I don't know what the stats are, but quite often it doesn't come off the way they plan. And I think that's just the nature of racing, isn't it? I mean, what happens once the gates open?
Absolutely.
There's no way.
The person who was most shocked probably at this stage is Jay Ford.
Yes. Yeah, I think
So, you can't knock Jay. I can't knock the stable at all. It's just the rule. It becomes a bit of a crutch because you check it to see whether a horse like this, and this is an extreme horse like case because it's obviously been set for the Sydney Cup, been ridden absolutely cold from wide draws its last couple of starts. You're completely expecting that to happen again. You're factoring that into the way the race can be run, the way you're pricing it. And when he lobs there, it's so frustrating. But it's just the rule that you rely upon that I think is why everyone gets angry. But his performance, incredible. And the first 5 across the line are all Sydney Cup horses for me.
I thought that Zarek was a little bit disappointing given, and look, I was heavily against it going into the race, and I didn't win any money on the race, but I backed Surefire. I thought I was pretty keen on it, and I also had something on Luncey's, who was well backed, and I laid the favourite. So the way I handled the race was such that I made no money, but I was hoping the second horse could get the job done. But Zarek, I just thought Luncey's might run the trip better than it. Look,
it was the only horse that kind of got lost back in the pack, didn't he? But he was disappointing regardless, Luncey, no doubt.
Yes.
But they all look strong, don't they? These ones up front, even the horse in the Queen's colours is picking back up late. And
it's that wide sort of no cover of a fair bit of the race, didn't it too? So
yes,
from memory. So its performance was pretty good, and certainly is one to keep an eye on as it continues through its preparation. No compromise, still towards the Sydney Cup, I suppose, does look a great chance.
What price is it?
I don't know.
$9. So Spanish Mission's favourite at the moment. Surefire, Crystal Pink. So all these horses that are in there, Jouet, Luncey's, Chalk Stream, $15. So it's certainly, unless something comes out of the weight for age grade, you would expect that is the prime lead up for the Sydney Cup.
Nickerjack Cave was a long price in that field, wasn't it, John? It was 25 to 1, and it's pulled up slow to recover. They said about Luncey's that it may not have appreciated the type of heavy that it was racing on the day, and they were a bit disappointed there, which I suppose is a fair comment. The winner's just gone enormous. Surefire's gone well. And
just gone enormous. The more you watch it, the more I don't know what weight it's got the Sydney Cup. I'm assuming it's very light because Jay's riding it and its form was, it's probably steady on paper. But jeepers creepers, they're going to have to do something special to beat it.
It's right in it. Okay, let's move on to the Epona over 1,900 metres. Another solid tempo race here, which really suited the winner, who was on the quick back over 5 days out of the Canberra Cup, which was a pretty strong figure on my database here, and wasn't surprised to see good support for it. Unfortunately, I didn't win on the race. I made the mistake of backing Galaxy Bella. I was on the second horse, Nerve Not Verve, and I did save the winner, but should have done better. So that's my own
Probably
fault.
The disappointing horse, Galaxy Bella. It was a weird run, wasn't it? It's a weird horse.
Yeah, look, they're saying that, it failed to travel at any stage and it didn't handle today's version of the Heavy Nine and was under hard riding from the 800, which you can see for yourself there. It was a bit easy in the betting, I suppose, from a map point of view. What you'd seen in the first few races may not have inspired you in terms of where you thought the horse might get to. But the winner was certainly well backed. I think it was 9 to 1 and the 6 to 1. And they may have even
bet a lot better.
Yeah, I think they bet a lot better earlier. So
I marked it about half its early price and wasn't smart enough to chime into it, but it's ended up lower than that. I think it was like $16 in the morning, and just that 2,000 metre, 1,900, whether it could run it out strong. Obviously, that setup, that 6 and 7 day backup has been really, a lot of people say, but on these tracks, it seems to be a real advantage. That really
on these testing traps, and obviously the shape of the race suited as well and helped it to its best. So all credit there.
Completely dominant, yeah.
I don't know if there's much else to say, is there?
The horse is out wide, obviously. It's because it was a fast run race, are working extra hard, and it probably wasn't the right spot to be, and they were a little bit out of their grade, Bedford. But I agree with you. What's this? Feel the Rush out wide here. It's just got a bit of smell, even though they've run good time. It's a smelly race. Like I don't know what to do with the race. I don't know where they go.
What do we say about Lay Lude? Lay Lude was a bit easy in the market. Well, there was a bit of resistance there, I should say. It started around the 3-1. I thought that it was perfectly suited the previous week where there was an advantage to be on speed and where it was in terms of the run. And it was maybe a little flattered that day. So is it just a disappointing run?
Yeah. That Harmony Rose getting checked. It was, you can see it's sort of pulling there. I think she's probably a run short to get to this sort of distance range. And I don't think she's an outside leader jumping into it. Like she's a bit more like she was last start. If she gets that really soft run, cuddles and she can sprint, that's her thing. She's not an outside leader grinder, but she was so well weighted, I guess you had to take her really seriously compared to a lot of the others. But yeah, a little bit disappointing, but I don't think grossly disappointing. I think what you saw is what you get with her there. That's just, the setup might have not been perfect for her.
So total forgive Harmony Rose. We saw that incident earlier. Total forgive it. Do you think it might do better back on a slightly drier surface?
Yeah, I just think he's probably struggled to place her at the moment. She's just a bit of an awkward horse to place with her rating being pretty high, and another horse that's probably a run behind, like to really have been well set up there on Saturday, and now he's copped a check there. Probably, yeah, she's got ability. It's just she's just a really hard horse to place at the moment, and I just get the feeling he might be behind the 8 ball with her. Like, so she might have had a little setback or something, and she just might be a run behind everyone.
Twice on Sunday was beaten a long way, pulled up lane 2 out of 5, so forget its run. And as you mentioned, Feel Rush already, it's that wide without cover there, so it's done.
And it was only second up.
A decent job for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the Ravnet Stakes, Ramvet, I should say, where don't know how Ravnet came into it, but anyway, so we've got a below average tempo here. I thought on
which was expected.
Which was probably expected, but it was still doesn't take away from the fact that I think Very Elegant was a bit disappointing, and Montefiore has just gone to its best or maybe a slight new peak. But I suppose you're not going to sack Very Elegant on that run, but certainly it would.
Well, it's so weird.
Coming to the turn, it seemed like it was. I'm in a good position here, and this horse is going to win, as they're sort of coming to the 400, and then it just wasn't able to let down.
I'm going to do something weird and go back to the last run. And it was such an ugly run race that it's amazing all the form that's come out of this race, as in Jouet back on the fence, Think It Over's run second in the Australian Cup. This horse has run well. Montefiore is obviously coming out 1. Very Elegant, right. But it was so hard to work out because Montefiore sort of boxed up in there last time, and she really only gets going the last 50, a little bit the same as Jouet. It's incredible how for such a bunch margin ugly race, the forms come out so well, and you can see Montefiore kind of only really gets going this last little bit. So it's in hindsight, it's easy to be forgiving, but it was very difficult to work out how well she went first up, Montefiore, and she obviously showed on Saturday that she's going a little bit better than that run suggested. Like you said, there's just no excuse for mine. It was just dominant over Very Elegant. Yeah,
and where to now for Montefiore, do you think?
Well, she'll probably, I don't know whether, hang on, we just talked about the Tancred. Probably a bit aggressive to back up in a Tancred, but she'll probably try and win a race like the Queen Elizabeth.
Right.
I would assume. I very highly doubt she'd go to a Sydney Cup or anything crazy like that. I'm assuming she'll stick to wait for age racing for the rest of the autumn. Just too tempting not to.
And Very Elegant, we'll see again.
Yeah, I don't. She's never been one of mine. She's always beaten me every time I've backed her. I've fallen into her when it looks like it's too good to be true. She gets beat, but not that I did on Saturday. But she's still run well. She's run well. It's just probably just underestimated the winner a touch, and maybe Very Elegant wasn't quite at her best as well.
So in terms of times, and we'll talk about this as we move on to the Rosehill Guineas there, where they've gone below average tempo, and it really was just a sprint home, and Animo was able to get much closer in the run than perhaps what some expected, and sort of just put them away and destroyed them in terms of margin, 7 1/4 lengths. Interestingly, though, they've gone, the Montefiore race over the 2000s gone about 9.1 lengths faster overall. And in terms of winners sectional times, i.e. Montefilia and Animo. Animo's probably come home about a length faster from the 800 home and almost the same 600 home. In terms of late sectionals, you would say that Montefilia is slightly stronger than Animo was. So it sort of leaves that Animo race as a bit of a query, despite the margins, and despite the fact that you see, gee, this horse has just gone like a jet and destroyed them. So what does it say about the others? But for me, Animo has gone around about 4.5 lengths below what it did when it stepped up to that 2,000 distance in the Cox Plate at last preparation. So it doesn't seem to have made the age improvement required, which is a bit of a worry going forward. So, there's not much to beat.
I think that's great. We talked about it before, but it's a huge comparison to make when you're talking about them potentially lining up in a Queen Elizabeth in 2 weeks over 2,000 metres. So same sort of setup, and you would have to say that Animo is going to be extremely aggressively priced coming off that win, and every chance that it comes up much shorter than Montefilia. And I don't know. We haven't had exact conversation, but I'd probably want to be in the camp of Montefilia, Very Elegant, before I'd want to be in Animo's camp.
For sure, I'd agree with that. I think that's a fair comment. Animo's doing what it needs to do, and it's racing extremely well, but it certainly isn't hitting those numbers that it was able to hit last preparation.
Well, Queen Elizabeth, and obviously we don't know exactly where these horses are going, but at the moment, Animo $3.50 favourite, Very Elegant $4.50, Montefilia $12.
Right. We don't know where they're going.
That's the problem. But if it lined up that market tomorrow, it would be very, interesting.
Interestingly, Profondo in the race, who obviously had the big rider switch there from Robbie Dolan and the Hugh Bowman.
Do you want me to go? I'll get that up. I'll get that race up.
Yeah, bring this race up. And it's another horse that just hasn't made age improvement. And look, to be fair, my figures weren't all that high for it, even when it did win the what was it?
It looked an improver, didn't it?
The spring champion. Yeah, it looked like an impressive horse, but
yes.
the figures never had it that highly rated, and it's pretty much gone. It might have gone a couple of pounds better on Saturday than what it did first up.
He hasn't even. He settled on Saturday. He obviously got a little bit keen there, but the pace is so slow. How do you make an excuse for him? It's just
you can't. You can't.
No.
For me, anyway, I can't. Converge, I thought was. Don't know what to say about it.
He was playing. Right, he was a bit like in some of the other comments you made. I haven't read the steward's report, but he said he just didn't handle the ground at all, didn't quicken at all. So I don't know what the difference is. Obviously, that maybe that sticky surface makes it difficult for those horses with a short turn of foot. But yeah, it wasn't the same horse as he was on Randwick yesterday.
Converge didn't make it to the steward's report, John.
No, which is a bit weird, isn't it? But I think, like I said, if he hadn't been asked, it would have been the same sort of answer that a lot of those riders gave, where they said he just didn't quite handle the surface. But interesting, he'll head to a Doncaster, so I think dry the better for him, certainly, if you're entertaining him in the Doncaster.
Well, interestingly too, when we were looking at the Randwick Guineas, and I think we were breaking that down, we were talking about how Animo just, I thought was very unlucky and should have won, and despite the fact I backed it that day, but it had a lot stronger finish, closing through the line in terms of its last 400 and 200, and I knew in the back of my mind I had that rating in the Cox Plate where it leapt forward on my figures, and I expected it to be, clearly the dominant horse over the 2,000 metres. But still, Converge did race like a different animal, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It didn't say like Profondo obviously was the query horse and dropped out. So it's basically won a one horse race in revision. It has done something that last 400 metres and it's gapped them, but you've got to be very cautious about treating it one of those big margin flashy winners where it may have just won a one horse race.
Yes. I don't know what else to say about the others. Okay, let's move on to the George Ryder, where we saw a below average tempo here. Forbidden Love took a sit and looked pretty soft again.
I loved this ride. I loved it.
It was a great ride by Bowman. This horse it's just a different animal. This preparation, I think.
He just
And
stays off the fence, lets them all go, doesn't panic, not worried about getting that pair further back. Oh, he's just so good in these situations.
look, I was against Private Eye again in this race. I think, though, that I think it's 2 weeks, isn't it, to Doncaster?
Yeah, it was a weird ride, but
Yeah, look, it sort of got held up for a run slightly and had to change course a bit. And look, it still finished off the race nicely and ran a 10th best last 200 rating on the day. And, for me, I think next start, third up, hopefully they'll put the blinkers back on.
That stable, you would assume, wouldn't you?
It'd be game day, and it's got to be a decent sort of chance in the Doncaster.
Massive chance. You would again sort of trying to line these horses up, which is difficult, but you would have to say this form's very strong. Dropping back to a Doncaster, especially a horse that's well in at the weights or anything like that, it's a pretty strong little race. This horse is just absolutely flying, isn't it?
Banker's Choice has gone well enough.
Yep.
And advanced its rating, or its first rating in Australia at Flemington there. And Halal was not sure what to say about it. I thought it had come back a better horse, and it's done a few things that are decent enough, but I thought it was a bit disappointing there. And what else can I say?
Might be a short course though. It was weird, Halal. I thought he dead set needed a mile, but his first two runs back were really good, and he's just flattened out a bit, hasn't he, since he's got up in distance. And I haven't been showing that replay the whole time. That's really smart. But anyway, we'll go back.
Well, Forbidden Love too. There we go. One of the connections there. All excited by the looks of it. Post race. So Forbidden Love obviously well backed again, 6-4 and 11-8, 220 all totes. So your old friend there, John, has had a
I think you've got to take this horse seriously too in a handicap. Probably next up, Law of Industry, certainly a much better run up on speed and fought on quite gamely. He's not hopeless in a probably a Doncaster. I assume that's where they're going.
Clearly, its best rating since coming to Australia, and you certainly couldn't write it off. Colding seems to be something from the past, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a shame. It's just weird how sort of those horses drop off, but he's definitely done his job anyway, hasn't he? He had a couple of really strong preparations and just a bit of a lighter former day. What is it? Light of older days or something?
And Riadini, what about it? There was 2 runs there last prep over the mile there at Randwick in the George Main, and can't think of the other race that think it over one, but
just lost its fight, hasn't it? It's just not going as well.
Just seems to. And look, it could be partly the track condition. I don't think it genuinely goes on a sort of a slow to heavy track, so you might just need a drier surface. Maybe back to Randwick, and maybe just needs to be let run. So
call out every possible chance.
Yeah, look, it's always been a little touch overrated for mine, but it continues to race well. So okay, on to the Slipper, and gee, what a win here, and what a fast tempo race. There's been all sorts of stuff in the stewards report, and we could spend a lot of time on that, but needless to say, there was a bit of crowding and interference there that certainly affected horses, including the winner, who lost considerable ground there. I thought at least 2 lengths. When was that, John? Around about the 700 or something?
Yeah, we'll see that. I was a little bit surprised at how aggressive Best of Bordeaux was. I'm not saying that he definitely hasn't cost him the race. Like, if you add up his tough run up outside leader and then eventually taking control and setting, what have they gone out to the 8 and the 6?
Well, they've gone out 4.8 lengths fast to the 800 and 5.3 fast to the 600, so fast tempo.
So he's worked for them a great majority of that part. No, it's just, he just kept pushing this horse. He still hasn't crossed. Where are we here? We've got to be close to the 8 now.
Ran the fastest rating at the day to the 800 and to the 600. So, yeah, certainly did plenty of work.
And here's the interference here, effort. So we'll go back. That's Sweet. She's Extreme. Gets sort of checked and cannons back into... Well, Queen of the Ball gets checked, cannons back, and like I don't know how you put a number on it, but that loss of momentum at that vital stage is just crucial in a race like this.
Yeah, and look, it's done extraordinarily well, and just a fantastic performance, the winner. I wasn't on it.
This
but,
horse and that horse completely dominant for me.
And Coolangatta, look, when it ranged up and loomed up there, it did look like it was going to win before Fireburn came through and sort of got the split and just finished way too powerfully.
She's run out of her head, really. All things considered, insanely well backed, which was a gutsy play considering the setup she had. But she's obviously if you could say that she's been up since like September, August last year, possibly, with only a 7-day break here or there. She's not a grossly built, mature colt or anything crazy. She's a coat hanger style filly that doesn't carry much condition, and for her to keep showing up and putting in these efforts, she's obviously a very talented horse.
Yep.
And she's run well again on Saturday, no doubt.
Agree, and a decent new peak for it. So Best of Bordeaux's gone well.
I did see that a lot of people sort of said She's Extreme was a good thing beaten. I had a good look at it. It was certainly unlucky, but to me it's sort of battling here, whereas Fireburn's putting a margin on it when it gets held up and checked, and I think it would have needed a helicopter to beat the winner, but, she was forgivable, but I think that was her golden ticket race where everything fell into her lap and she really needed to take advantage of it. I'd much rather be with the first and second horses going forward and third horse going forward.
And going forward, I suppose, with She's Extreme, I mean, do you think that that's the type of run that's going to be overplayed by the market?
Massive. I 100% agree with that. Yeah, 100% agree with that. And there were a couple of unlucky runners. Seven Vales caught wide, Sir Jardin caught back and wide, Sebenak. I think there's some nice enough horses going forward, like 3-year-old Riz, if they're looked after. Going forward to a size, I still think Best of Bordeaux and the winner are probably the horses to beat, unless a horse like Conquer or that Show Court that we saw in that other race show up there. They're probably the new blood, but I think 1 and 2 are dominant out of this race going to 1,400.
And OJ2 was not a bad effort too after being held up there.
Yeah, which was incredible, really, considering it was a bit weak at its last couple, but certainly ran well.
Okay, so moving on to the Galaxy over 1,100 metres. They've gone out below average tempo here. Wow, what a story, this Shelby 66. Four consecutive 7-day backups. The horse is just flying.
What sort of figure on Saturday?
Look, provisionally it's probably gone maybe 2 pounds better than what it did last week.
So somewhere in between its nature strip run?
Yeah, certainly. So it's probably returned to similar rate, a couple of pounds better, and certainly not as good as the Eduardo race there. But gee, this horse is just absolutely flying, and the stable is just going so well, and Danny Williams has just done a terrific job. And all connected with the stable as well. Just had this horse
I've dead set
amazing. It's just an amazing story. The big parade, race competitively. Bellucci Babe ran well. Well, it probably did have every chance, but still, it's raced competitively enough to suggest that it's going to be in for a decent prep. Overpass, had some issues there in terms of luck. Look, Brooklyn Hustle ran on well.
It was probably a good thing beat Overpass, but it would have won by a short half head if it did win in a very competitive race. It's just, it's racing well.
Bella Nipotina, there was specking for it, 25s into 15s, and it's gone well and had no luck, I thought. So Ballistic Lover was, what's the story there?
Horrendous, right?
Slow to recover, wide without cover. I had something on it. There was really good money. There was really good money for Rule of Law, 17 to 1 into 10 to 1, and it sort of raced a bit keen, and it was a bit tight there too, and sort of wasn't tested at all. But I was heavily against it. I just figured that they were going to the well one too many times, and with
the poster boy for To the Well won the race.
True, but Rule of Law. I mean, the blinkers went back on, which I thought was a little bit weird there on the backup. All through this preparation, where it's won those 5 races on the trot, have been with the blinkers off. So that sort of...
I think Bjorn knew that he probably needed to find an extra length or so on Malkovich and Rule of Law to get them up to that level, and I think they just sort of prayed that the blinkers were the magic, in this sort of fast run race, and I think it was a shot at the title, but... That is a really high quality sprint, no doubt. Like Isotope was a forgive, Jamea was a forgive. That Ballistic Lover just was set the biggest halves in the history of the world. Polili probably didn't get to the right spot. Brooklyn Hustle, as you said, held up a little. What's this horse? You talked about it. Bella Nipotina was a bit stiff, even though it was in the right spot. There's not much between these horses. I think the handicapper got it pretty right, and the ones that got the right runs and probably won the race. That was the difference. If you lined these horses up again tomorrow and redid the barrier draw, you'd probably get a different result a few times. But they're all raced with good merit in their runs.
And certainly not Group 1 standard, I don't think. But anyway, you can only beat what you've
A very competitive Group 1 handicap. That's all you, isn't it? It was a very well handicapped competitive race.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, when you say big parade's carrying 57.5 or whatever it carried in a Galaxy, you'd nearly die, wouldn't you? But anyway.
The birthday card, the last race there over 1200, slow pace here. Emanate got away and won the race by a big margin, and fortunately for me, he got the job done. But Mallory, who I was really heavily against, just went awful.
Had his chance.
Geis was certainly a forgive, I thought, John.
Yeah, I thought it was probably a run short, so it can improve. The winner was an interesting one. Like it had to have 2 runs back, and then I love it when Cummings is not scared to send them back to the trials when they're maybe just a little bit off or whatever before, and he sort of gets that lactic or whatever you want to call it out of their legs before sending them back to the races, especially when they've run on wet tracks. He quite often does it, and it certainly did the trick with this horse. It must have improved off its last couple of runs where it was not plain but just fair. Went to
I think it's probably gone not a lot better off the 28-day break, and it was certainly back to fillies and mares grade there.
Yeah.
It's obviously gone as good as it can go. But perhaps this horse, this preparation can still improve from that. So
looks like it, doesn't it? Looks like it's on the up.
It does look like it's on the up. Marbusha there was a bit of specking for it. John, what do you say about it?
Johnny on the spot. I think that was a nice race for it. Hard fit horse, drew perfectly to sort of cruise forward, find an on pace spot. And obviously that was a nice position to be on Saturday, whether it was lead, outside lead. Thought he rode it as well as he could. And I think what you see is what you get Marbusha there. I don't think he can possibly improve an inch off that. Maybe back in distance, maybe ideal for it. 1,000, 1,100, you might see a more competitive horse, but I think that's as good as it possibly goes.
A couple of forgives, I suppose, too. We mentioned Geis, it was slow to recover. Steinem, it was wide, no cover, and probably forgive for it.
That was the import, wasn't it, out here in the Frank Cook colours? Yeah.
Steinem was the Kira Ma horse.
Kira Ma.
That's had all its preparations in Australia so far, but certainly raced nowhere near what it can rate. So forgive it totally.
It was very short in early betting, wasn't it? Like very well kept safe.
Well, it was, and resuming, I suppose, with J-Mac on, and maybe there was, and the markets. This horse has always genuinely been a horse that the markets liked, Steinem. So certainly not potting it and saying it can't improve substantially off that run.
The Aussie Bloodstock horse wasn't bad either, coming out of a midweek Wednesday, a Canterbury race where it had certainly a nice run and dashed and way up in grade with things against it. I think it had Equicast on too, so it probably a bit of a forgive as well.
Nikki Swing, 2 ordinary runs, or what do you say about it?
I think she's found her level in life. She's probably, she'll keep racing honestly, but she's not a horse that you really want to. You can't think, oh, geez, wherever she goes next start, I want to be on Nikki's Fling. She's not that sort of horse, is she?
Well, it got held up the last furlong, but I mean, geez, it would have to improve. But it's not for me.
Ruby Tuesday continues to be a nightmare of a creature to follow.
Well, it did lose a plate, so is that an excuse? Does it need to step up in distance? I mean, all those things.
Yeah, it can improve for sure, but she's just a nightmare the way she starts her races. She's definitely a much better horse when she finds the front, so probably up in distance and maybe a wider draw gives her a better hope to do that. So she was forgivable, but it's probably all merit with the winner pretty much.
Yes. Okay, that's the review. Keeping it fairly short and sweet. For me, the 2 horses to follow are Fireburn and Private Eye. John, what about you?
Yeah, I think no compromise will win the Sydney Cup. even though young Jay Dodge, someone upset me there too. They sent through the old Jay Ford. I think he's got like a 4% strike rate at Rosehill too. That was the one that really put me over the fence on Saturday. But I don't think it was his doing that horse winning the race. Nothing there. I think Montefilia will give the Queen Elizabeth a big shake if they go there, but obviously be careful. Make sure it's definitely going there. Private, I agree with you. Is a good chance in the thing, and I'm very wary of Law of Indices now that he's shown something this preparation, and I think I agree with you. Best of Bordeaux and Fireburn can both run well in the size if they press on. That's about it.
Okay, excellent. Let's get on to the questions.
There from me.
No, it was one of those days, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, first question this week, John, is from Combat. Is that how we...
Combat. K-O-M-M-B-A-T. Combat.
Obviously, it's subjective, but how long do you usually, into a race meeting, do you wait before you make any adjustments on track bias? Any hints or nuggets in general about track bias and how it can be perceived?
Well, Saturday's probably a good example for that because history probably said a 2 metre rail's a funny one. Like, there's not too many cases of it, but if you say use the 3 metre rail, you probably, in a track like that, rain on the day, probably expected it to be sort of 4 or 5 off, and a big chance that you'd be able to run on a little bit from back and wide. And it was evident pretty early, even the midway, that Akira, whatever it is, like 15-1, your horse ran well from the box seat back to the inside at a price, even though you had it much shorter. The market certainly didn't.
Yeah.
It was a little bit smelly that, inside and on pace was going to be a little bit better than maybe most people set it up. So it can be right from the first race, I assume, but it just depends. You've got to be careful that, it's not pace and pace-related, tempo-related, that why horses run well. When you get an even tempo and horses run a little bit better than others in a spot that you didn't expect, you can adjust pretty early.
Well, two of the top 10 outperformances on the day for mine were the Quinella in race 1. So that in Saturday's case, it was very much straight after race 1. I was prepared to make a call. Also because of the tempo, because they did go above average tempo, so it's not like they've walked.
Yes.
And it's looked that way, and they were all sort of pretty much rails and run, weren't they? I think.
Yeah. If not that one off at worst, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was prepared to make the call early, and I did make some adjustments. I didn't sort of do anything too drastic, but certainly gave a few ticks to certainly reversed any negatives that I'd given to horses with low draws, based on where I thought they'd map, and maybe a couple of ticks to some other horses, given the setup, which are sort of situation I don't really want to get into, but but I mean, it's certainly, I suppose, to answer the question, Saturday was a day where I made the call after race 1, and sometimes you get it wrong too. That's the other problem. But
bit of a perfect, and first use of the track too is obviously another query that maybe it may change after that. But it was a bit of a perfect storm for this question, wasn't it? Saturday, it was just an ideal race where you sort of really got a good lead into what it might be, and as it turned out, it was correct. Yeah,
I think so. But generally, a couple of races, I suppose, on average, depending on what sort of races they are. If they're 2-year-olds or highways, or if there's a significant tempo effect in the race that mightn't make it clear, then I sort of might wait a few races. But it could be anything between 1 race and I suppose 4 races, can't it?
Yes.
Depending on.
And it can shift.
And look, it could just be that what you're seeing is what you expected to see. So if what you're seeing is what you expected to see, well, there's really no change to make.
Correct.
It's only when it contradicts what you think going into the meeting. So. And
you're sort of like updating it every race, regardless, aren't you? You're always checking it because you get trace tracks like the Kenzo or others where it can sort of shift. So you don't want to just lock it in after race 1, and it's basically every race you're checking yourself.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, next question from Mr. Damage, Angel Song. What are you looking for when trying to identify horses that are aimed at a particular race? When is grand final day?
Thanks, Boyd.
Yeah.
It's a tough question, isn't it? And the hardest part is that they're adding more and more of these pop-up races for huge money, which is taking you off traditional paths, which makes it far more difficult to predict where they're going. And as you saw last week, basically Animo and Converge were both dual nommed in the Ryder and the Rosehill Guineas. No one knew, including their connections, I don't think. Maybe Animo knew a little bit earlier because they didn't accept in the Ryder, but Converge had no idea which way to go, and makes it very difficult for people outside of that to try and work it out. I think you've got to demand big value if you're betting in early races and trying to find their grand finals. But is it that's from a pre-post perspective, right?
Yeah.
If you're analysing the race, trying to work out whether today's its grand final, it's probably more on fitness setup and history of the horse.
But look, I think we've talked about this once before or something similar, and I've sort of said that I don't really think about it. Like, it's not something that I sort of go into the race thinking, well, today's the grand final, therefore this horse should be able to get back to this sort of figure. Because what they can do and what they are doing currently is obviously the question,
Yes.
isn't it? In terms of,
Yeah.
are they going well enough where they're able to elevate their rating or step their rating towards that best figure? Or is it that that best figure was earned some time ago and they're just simply not going as well? So
Yeah.
I suppose it depends. So I don't really sit out there and plan when I think a horse's grand final is likely to be, therefore that's going to affect my betting in some way, shape or form, because it's not. But I suppose in the case of a horse like Private Eye or Brutality, where I was very keen on that horse prior to the Villiers, where it won, there were some obvious signs that next start was going to be game day.
Well, there's certainly stables you observe their steps that they take.
The patterns, yeah, the patterns. So I don't think it's a question of trying to work out when the grand final is going to be. I think it's just on a horse by horse case, and you probably better off focusing on other things.
Focus on their setups. That's right. And Private Eye's in isolation. You look at it, blinkers off, maps back and inside, blah blah blah. Next time you've got to take into account, very good chance it'll have blinkers on. Total different ball game. It just didn't have them Saturday, so it's regardless. It's not trying because it's not its grand final in this race on Saturday. It's only second up. It doesn't have its blinkers. It maps back and inside 1400. Slow pace. Million things against it, and that's nothing to do with being its grand final. That's just factual.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to reply. Okay, a question here from Michael regarding Profondo. Cut to make a racehorse, or leave it to and save it for a stud career? Look, I thought Profondo was overrated. I think we talked about that earlier, and I don't think it's made the improvement necessary, and I don't think it's necessarily going to do much better than it's already shown.
And I agree with you. The last preparation was a bit rushed, and he sort of got there so quick, and he was so dominant. And even though he didn't beat the clock in that preparation, he certainly looked a horse that was likely to progress further this preparation. And whether, like the question saying, whether you cut him to make a racehorse, I would say yes, he needs that if he's to progress, because nothing else says
or have a chance of progressing.
Yeah, because at the moment his racing manners and what he's doing is not enough to elevate him to where everyone thought he might go, and that's probably the last thing left, other than maybe a stable change or something that could see him improve significantly.
Okay, so a question here from Simbot: how does this crop of 3-year-olds stack up on the data? In open class, they've been non-competitive, and he's referred to the All-Star Mile and the George Ryder. Converge, the current favourite for the Doncaster, and Animo's win on the weekend looked better than it actually was. Well, in terms of that, we've already talked about that. Yes, the win did look better than it was. In terms of them not racing competitively in the All-Star Mile, well, the 3-year-olds there were just having a quick squeeze. We had Pinstripe, which I sort of marked 25 to 1 coming into the race. Lightsaber, which I marked as a 50s chance, and Captivant, which I marked as a 500 to 1 chance. So, and even the market percentages, if you sum total of the percentages, there wasn't a lot of chance given to those 3-year-olds. Halal was, I think, the sole 3-year-old in the George Ryder, wasn't it?
Yes. left in there. Yep.
Yeah. So I see your point, but I think you know, what does it really matter? You know, how this particular crop's going versus another crop. That's not how you're betting and making money.
Well, it is interesting because a lot of people do line it up, and the media does obviously have an impact on markets. And if, as like we sort of pointed out, if you framed a market tomorrow for the Queen Elizabeth, there's a very good chance that Animo would go around 2-1 favourite, or at least open up 2-1 favourite. So the media does have an effect, and if you're trying to line them up, I think he's only just trying to say 3-year-olds versus open class, right? Not all of against.
I think so. I think that's what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and you would have to say that they've got to prove themselves at this point. It looks like the very elegant monophilia duets have got the edge over the 3-year-olds.
Yeah, look, I think our 2-year-olds, well, certainly our 2-year-olds this season have been substandard, save for Fireburn Saturday, and the 3-year-olds, I just can't think of them all off the top of my head, but I don't think there's been any world beaters there.
Who would you rather back out of Converge and Private Eye in the Doncaster?
Private Eye, for sure.
Yeah.
So look, Converge that might actually be a reasonable thing for them to do or consider, and dropping it back in distance and going to the Doncaster, and you wouldn't necessarily write it off. But for me, I think Private Eye.
Yeah, but head to head, and like as you said, Converge is already the favourite.
Converge is favourite for the Doncaster, is it?
Yeah, close enough too. I think he's favourite.
Right? So yeah. Okay. Well, so head to head, the market's saying the other way. But for me, I think that what's Private Eye currently?
$13. Converge $8. Forbidden Love, I'm Thunderstruck $6.
So 7-1, 12-1. I would think that Private Eye would firm from this point.
Agree.
And I would expect perhaps Converge to ease from this point. So where they end up, I don't know. But for me, I'd prefer to back Private Eye.
At the moment, you would say that the market is overestimating the 3-year-olds on what they've done so far.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, probably. Yeah. Okay, next question from Craig. Didn't really ask much of
it's a big question, detail. This one.
Very elegant question mark. I presume you mean, did it go awful? It looks like, in just terms of the numbers, let me pull up that race. On a provisional basis, yes, it's rated down from what it did second up, and what it did second up is nowhere near what it got to last prep. So once again, I don't think she's going as well as she was. That could partly be due to the tracks and the way they've been playing of late. I don't know. But I would have to say, yes, she's not going as well as she was. Last prep was, obviously a best prep, or I think so, was her best prep. But, she's a top horse. So what do you say? You can't write them off on one run. So it hasn't gone terribly. It's rated down, hasn't rated a long way down by any means, and certainly wouldn't be sacking it off that run.
And the winner did something.
The winner did do something, indeed. Okay, so there's a question from Hariba. I've seen a lot of criticism of slow pace allowing Zaki to take out the All-Star Mile. Do you agree? Is the first part of his question. Just going over to the numbers. And it looks like, they haven't crawled, but they've certainly gone below average. Have you got the race there, John, have you?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it closely, and I just wanted to see how slow they went, but it does look like they pulled up after doing a bit of work early through the middle.
Yeah, the big slowdown in the race was probably the 800 to 600, where it looks like they've slowed down lead speed 3.6 lengths. Zaki obviously been able to get up outside the leader there as the 6-4 favourite in a race that's moderately run, where you did have other horses that I was surprised didn't attempt to try and put some more pressure into the race early. I've
got a question for you there. Do you think that is because of the handicap conditions of this? Because it's a weight for age race, a lot of these horses that get in on invites and things are probably scared to do more at any stage in the race than they're possibly capable of, because they're so poorly in at the weights when a horse like Zaki's so well in, that they're, like if it was a handicap, you may see far more daring tactics, they would have probably changed the outcome of the tempo of the race.
Well, a horse like Streets of Avalon, who I would have expected to put more pressure into the race early, and maybe even a horse like Lightsaber. I mean, Streets of Avalon's 200 to 1. You've got virtually no chance anyway. So,
well, that's what I mean. Like, say Lightsaber, he's probably trying to be ridden to conserve as much as he can to hold on for third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, because the money's so good, but he's so poorly suited by the race conditions that they ride themselves to finish as best as they can, not to try and win.
Yes, but riding a horse out of its normal pattern.
I'm not saying it's a genius idea. I just feel that that's what happens in these big money races quite often, that when they know they can't win, they ride them against their pattern to try and cuddle them. You know what I mean? To just sneak into positions. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, looking at the race, if you're watching the race, the moment you see Zaki get outside lead, and by the time they got to the 800, nothing sort of trying to put any pressure into the race or do anything or make any sort of a move, then it's pretty much all over, isn't it?
You're on good terms with yourself, absolutely.
Yeah, you're on good terms with yourself for sure. So that was the first part of Ariba's question.
Yeah.
And who are they suggesting should have taken more initiative? Would it have held their own course? Well, that's always debatable. My point is, I think horses, once they've found their pattern and you can identify that they've got an established form line and that they race best doing a particular thing in a race, then to try to overturn that may not be a good idea, especially when you've got a low chance of winning or low chance of being competitive anyway. So, look, going to that race, certainly expected more tempo than what was displayed, and I think anyone who did a map would have suggested the same thing. All credit to Jamie Carr. I mean, she's just a terrific rider and obviously made the most of what she had.
Rider.
Great wide draw rider, great on pace rider, and took advantage of what was before her. So, there's probably maybe inspirational girl. Was it a bit disappointing?
It had it was its birthday. I think was the start before when Zaki knocked up. I thought Zaki might still be one short and a little bit vulnerable on Saturday, but once it got the run, it got the way you said. It just sort of it obviously progressed a little bit. You know, she's a good trainer, Annabelle. She's doing some good things, and he was spot on. And the second horse went like a rocket. And and I would love to see that race as a handicap. That's all, but it's a different angle of coming at his question. But I just feel that if it was a sort of Doncaster setup invitational race, it would be much more competitive.
So I'm assuming that I'm Thunderstruck is probably going towards Doncaster.
Yeah, it's hard in the market. Might be second or third favourite.
Second or third favourite. So yeah. So it's obviously going to be you would think would be competitive based on that.
Great race. Like just looking at the betting, Forbidden Love 6, I'm Thunderstruck 6, Converge 8. I think as I said, it's a bit short. Animo doubtful, they say. So I'm assuming it's going 2,000 or up to a Derby. Private Eye 13. And then even horses like Law of Indices, Banker's Choice aren't out of it down the market a bit, sort of around the 20 to 1 mark. It's going to be a hell of a race.
Interestingly, just when you think about horses who are unlucky and they should have won and it should have certainly beaten, and you hear all this sort of rhetoric post race a lot, and you heard that with Pinstriped post the Australian Guineas there in Melbourne with Michael D's ride there. People saying, oh, it should have pissed in, or it should have won, or it should have done this, or it should have done that. I mean, even so, it was interestingly that I think it was around 5 to 1 maybe in early markets, Pinstriped, and when we talked about the race the other day, and it eased and started around 11 to 1, I think. So there was no money for it, and so the market, obviously, all the players that set the markets didn't determine that was the case, or that the figures were strong enough. So you've got to be a little bit careful, I suppose, in trying to tack too much onto these horses that are seemingly certain he's beaten.
Well, we were sort of just talking about that previously. The media certainly has a presence in early markets, and then whether you say sanity prevails or the more educated players step in late and correct it, but they definitely do have a bigger presence early in betting and shaping early markets than they have on finalised markets, but they do have a presence, and it's usually just all those played up things. Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to a question from Johnny here. Hey, Paul, got a question for the show. How do either of you quantify horse psychology and the notion of a non-winner? Is it best to ignore a horse labelled as a non-winner and treat every race on its merits, or do you guys genuinely think that it can play a factor in a horse's will to win? Good example, Mallory sucked me in again on the weekend with what looked like a perfect setup with the map off its prior run, and she didn't give a yelp. Obviously, there could have been plenty of other factors at play, moving into open class for the first time, for example, but that was just one example that comes to mind. The term gets thrown around a fair bit, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I think the first notion that I ever sort of thought about in terms of consistency and, winners keep winning and all that sort of stuff was back in the Don Scott era, in the early 80s when I bought his book. I think it was 82. And he talked about that, that concept of, winners keep winning and losers keep losing. And that you should bonus horses that have good strike rates and penalise horses that don't. I think that process is partially flawed because you could win 6 out of 6 in very low grade races, or you could win 6 out of 6 in the metropolitan area.
It has to be partially flawed, doesn't it? It has to be.
Yeah, it has to be. So, but there is an element to it which I do believe rings true, and the way in which I do it is different to what he espoused, but certainly that was the starting point that I used to sort of calculate my own way of doing it. So,
and that's the way he sort of wrote too, was it? Like he tries to blanket cover a lot of issues that you could go into and write 5 chapters about, but it's not possible, isn't it? So it's sort of he's trying to make point you in the right direction.
Look, other people say that win strike rate doesn't make a lot of difference. Backing horses in certain price ranges, whether they win 10% of races or whether they win 30% or 40% of races, it doesn't really change the betting return dynamic all that much. And there's some element of truth into that. But in terms of the way the market prices, I believe it's a factor that they consider in terms of the way the teams do things. But to what extent, I think you've just got to come up with your own number. But I don't think about a horse. I never look at a horse in a race and go, oh, gee, you're a non-winner, or you just don't win, or you're 2 from 30, or you're 15 from 30. I don't even think about it. The process is just the process. And yes, there is a value that's attributed to things like that, but it's not as severe as perhaps.
Form usually explains the outcome far more than horse psychology, I would imagine. Like, like once every 20 years or something, or 10 years or 5 years, we see a horse like Northerly that, if it's in a dogfight, you want to be with Northerly. It's usually if a horse is, 2 horses going head to head and one consistently beating it, there's usually a reason. It's not psychology, I would imagine. And surely trying to get in a horse's head every horse's head every race I'd much rather take your approach than trying to do it because you'll go mad yourself, I would imagine.
Well, look, Mallory for me was a horse. I marked it 8-1 going into the race off my automatics, and obviously the market was a lot shorter, and I was against it heavily. And look, just on my numbers, it simply hadn't done a number that was strong enough to be able to see it winning the race, and hence why I marked it the price I did. Whereas the winner, had say 2 or 3 ratings in its last 5 that would clearly put it in a winnable position. So for me, it was just the fact that it didn't have much
guts
or substance, and I think it had won 1 out of 10, and there might have been a pound in it in terms of the difference. The way I treated it versus as a so-called non-winner, but yeah, certainly not as significant as maybe some people think, but I think it still plays a part.
And then you get a horse like Shelby 66, who probably was the biggest non-winner in highway racing in Sydney, considering it sort of had run up to win races and beaten in close. Like it just looked a horse that was allergic to winning, and now it's a Group 1 Galaxy.
Well, it's had 24 starts and it's won 4 races, and 3 of those wins have been since February this year. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a fair argument, right? So, and you don't often see a horse like it suddenly jump and establish a new ratings level once it's had 20 starts, sort of thing. So that's an exception rather than the rule. But
Isn't it? Yeah, but it does happen, doesn't it? It shows that every horse has its race.
Yeah, it plays a part. It certainly is something that I factor, but I do it differently to the way Scott suggested. And but yeah, if you want to factor it, by all means, I mean, consider it, but don't perhaps make it.
And demand more from a horse with a low strike rate, whether it be value or circumstances that are suiting it on the day, more than a horse that is on the up and has a high percentage of win.
Indeed. Okay, Trent asked the question, did Animo put himself into the top contention for the Queensland pecking or Queen Elizabeth pecking order, and theoretically how much better can he go in a faster run race? Well, the difference I had on Saturday between that run and, say, the Cox Plate run, which was run at a much faster pace, was around about 4.25 lengths, I think I said earlier, was the difference I had between what Animo did then versus what it did last prep. So I suppose in theory, if you're using my numbers, you'd say that's potentially how much faster it could go. But whether it can, I've got a few doubts because of I just don't think it's made the improvement.
Yeah, I do things very differently to you, but I do use your base ratings as a sort of a guide, and I try and match it up with other preparations absolutely to when they're going to peak. And to me, peaking is all about fitness. And the more history you have, the easier it is to work out what a horse probably should do on that day compared to old information. Obviously, always updating it. Sometimes they do progress. More lightly race, they're going to do that. But to me, it's all about, every race is about setup. So very hard to give a horse a peak performance if it's in a vulnerable position fitness wise, and that would be the way I'd answer it. If it's got every tick from a fitness perspective, then I can expect it to probably reach a peak or race near it.
Okay, let's get on to the question of the week, John, from Nathan.
Holy heck, hang on. There it is. Oh, we haven't even talked about your minute top sport. You better talk about top sport as well, but we'll talk about the question first.
We will talk about top sport. Okay, so question of the week comes from Nathan Crawford here. You can see there, when using ratings to price races, would you use a horse's peak performance and adjust from that, or do you just use a rating from a past performance in similar circumstances? Look, I think it's such a good question because it relates to, what I consider to be really the guts of the practicality in terms of forming an opinion about a race and looking at the chances in a race. There are times where I would use a horse's peak performance. It's more likely that I would do that if I felt the horse was following a particular pattern and, and all the ducks were in line. The map was right, the setup was right, the distance was right, the stage of preparation was right, the lead-up form was supportive of a likelihood that the horse was going to advance and get towards that number, then and if the horse was perhaps more lightly raced, it would be a good way I would use to sort of consider peak performances. In terms of generally assessing horses, there's lots of ways to do it, and there's no one answer that's going to fit the mould. And I think it's fair to say that more recent runs are heavily weighted or more heavily weighted. It's not all about one run. It's not all about last start, although last start's very important. Because obviously if a horse, has an excuse and doesn't run to expectation, then you can't just simply use that figure and go, well, I'm going to assess it next time off that. So, I suppose you've got to consider stage of preparation, what the horse has been doing, what can it do, and where you think that fits in relation to the context of today's race. But generally speaking, it's probably most likely going to be in the last few starts that I would use the horse's rating, and then, a series of bonuses and penalties happen or occur after that then lead to a final price. So I don't look at the market when assessing horses. I don't even think about it when I do my first cut. I'm just simply trying to rate it raw of what the computer thinks, first of all, what I think if there's some tweaks that need to be made, and then once all that's done, then I can look at the market and make some comparisons. But look, you could use the horse's peak performance and try and adjust from that, but what happens if that peaks 2 preparations ago when clearly the horse is not the same horse? It might have been as a 2-year-old and now it's a 4-year-old, and it just doesn't simply work that way. But maybe, you can consider peak performances up to maybe 12 months old.
I already answered this question. I answered the wrong question.
Did you? What did you say?
The last race when you were talking about Animo, I thought you were talking about this question. I haven't had a question of the week, so I already answered it. But it's that's what I was talking about before. So I'm very similar to you. It's all about the more history you've got, the better, and you can use similar positions in previous things as guides. But it's the more recency you've got, the better, and you've got to be very wary, like you just said, of things like jumping from 2 to 3-year-old years. And even, like as you say, if you're sort of using 2-year-old data and 4-year-olds, holy heck, you're playing with fire. But it's just, to me, it's all about fitness bases, and I think it's very dangerous to use a high number as your starting point. I'd rather use probably a low number and build off it if I had the choice of the two.
Well, look, a horse, I suppose the best way to summarise this is to say that horses aren't one number. There are a range of numbers. I mean, a horse is going to strike between a range of ratings, and being able to sort of understand things like, when a horse produces a peak performance like Shelby 66 did in the race with Eduardo there, it's likely to regress. How far it's going to regress? Well, you can sort of perhaps build a method or put some numbers around that based on what the horse, was expected to do, what it normally does, what did it do, how far is it likely to come back. And look, there is a fair bit of guesswork in all of that, and if you have a race where you've got a number of the main chances that you've had to sort of interpret and be a little bit creative with, and sort of to come up with the number that you finally put against it, then they're obviously races that you maybe treat a little bit more cautiously from a betting perspective. When you've been conservative with a horse and you feel like you have a dominant advantage in a race, and you could have had it a lot shorter, and you've been kind to the other main chances, they're races that you can really open up your shoulders and be more confident with. I think that's the way to...
And Shelby's a really interesting, even though it is a complete freak situation. It's a horse where, okay, if you gave it its peak number, you probably had it odds on in both its last 2 starts. And the market... and the market probably underplayed it and dismissed him and put him up, 12, 10 to 1 or whatever they were starts. And then the people that were probably a little bit less aggressive with their regression have been paid off with, handsomely its last 2 starts. Because if you gave it anywhere near those figures, you've won a fortune its last 2 starts. But it was, such an anomaly, the horse and what it's done. It's a great example in so many ways of freakish things that can happen in racing.
Yeah, and you've got to think about what that market does to the rest of the horses in the race, right? So, look, I ended up marking it around the 4 to 1 mark on Saturday. I backed Ballistic Lover, and I saved on away game and got a bit of a result there. And the previous week I backed Shelby as well.
And you haven't used a peak rating to get that 4 to 1?
No. Well, I've actually used the peak, but I've come off it. So I've tried to regress that rating back towards what I thought the horse would do, and I think I'd marked Shelby back 9 pounds or something the previous start, and I think it might have gone back 11 or something like that from memory. So it was sort of in the order of the proportion in which I allocated, and once again it's a bit of a guess, and but to sort of just simply pluck that 1,000 metre run, especially 1,000 metre runs, when horses peak over 1,000 metres, it very much is a unique distance.
It's a dangerous example to use too, because you could say after 2 runs, well, I should have just used that number and I'm a genius and I would have won $1 million, but it's not going to happen many times, ever.
No,
and it still did regress, right?
It did. So I think that, look, the horse has obviously established a new level. There's no doubt about that. But if you did that with every peak performance, you'd have holes in your pockets.
You'd be hurting. Yeah.
Okay, guys. So that's the question of the week from Nathan. Nathan, I'll get in touch with you and get your details, and we'll get that credit to your Top Sport account. Thanks everybody for their participation this week. And of course, if there's anything that you think we can do better or anything you'd like to see us add, we'll certainly do that. Top Sport, our sponsors of the show. If you don't have an account already, you should have one. Speak to Tristan. They always give you a fair bet, and they're prepared to offer the limits that they have in place the moment they go up. So if there's Group 1 racing on at the moment, which there is, I think it's something like 10,000 to win 10,000 early. Yep, to win 10,000 early, to win 25,000 late. And if there's a feature Group 1 that they determine, it's to win 20 early and 50 late. Best of best options. And of course, even if you're betting on a ordinary race there, midweek metro, you can get those limits from the moment they go up.
And I think they're the only ones who I've seen that allow things like best of best all ups and all sorts of. They're very fair. They allow quaddies for. I don't know too many people that have been restricted from exotics. Most people do that now. Certainly, yeah, as you say, the best way to describe them is the fairest bookmaker in the industry across the board.
Okay. Thanks, guys. We'll chat to you on Thursday and preview any of the Group 1s or 2s coming up on the weekend.
Cheers, guys.